viewers, we are looking forward to your talk.
Well, thank you very much. All right. And thanks to everybody who's stuck around for the last talk of the day and for everybody joining virtually. Hopefully I can cover a lot of topics that you might be interested in, and we'll do some Q&A at the end as well. That's always good. And if anybody does have a question and they don't get a chance to ask it, I'll share my email at the end as well. And so you should feel free to contact me that way. But anyway, what I wanted to talk about today was, well, really what I pretty much always talk about, but I'm always doing it from a different angle. What I want to talk about is how the best product companies work and how different that is from how most companies work. Now, SVPG, I created that with a few friends over 20 years ago now, as a way just to share the techniques and practices of the best product companies. It's probably worth pointing out to you, nothing in the books, if you've read Inspired, if you've read Empowered, nothing in the books was invented by us. None of the things I write about in the articles is invented by us. What we do is just share what we see the top companies do. Now, of course, they're not all the same. I mean, if you've ever been inside Apple, or if you've been inside Amazon, or inside Netflix or Spotify, these companies have some very different cultures. But what's interesting to me, especially to my partners as well, but it's, what really drives me is, what are the common themes? Because I think you'll find in all of the top product companies, when you look inside at how they really work, they all believe in a set of first principles about product. And to me, that's what's interesting, because in companies that don't work like those companies work, they don't follow those principles. They, as you'll see, they follow other. It's not like they're things that make no sense. They're just things that do not consistently lead to innovation. So that's what I'm interested in, and that's what we share. We try to share how the best companies work. Now, if you have read any of my books, you know, by far the most common question I get, this is especially true with Inspired, but the most common question I get is, yeah, that sounds great. That's how we want to work. The problem is our company is so far away from working that way. Our CEO doesn't understand this. Our stakeholders don't understand this. Even our own engineers and our own designers and our own product managers don't understand this. So how in the world could we possibly move from how we work today to this other way of working? That question, in so many different flavors, is by far the most common question. And so that's why the most recent book is literally just trying to answer that question. How does a company transform to working like the best product companies? Now, I don't want to pretend this is not easy. I never have said it's easy, but it is doable. One of the things I do in the new book is I share 7 case studies of real companies, none of which are the Netflixes or the Amazons of the world, all of which are older companies. They're from all over the world: Brazil, Saudi Arabia, the UK, Germany. I'm sharing companies from all over the world that have worked the old way and changed to work like the best companies. And I share what they've been able to do, which is ultimately the proof of somebody who's transformed, is they can do things they could never do before. So that's where this is coming from. So let's start with this term, product operating model. The truth is, we didn't make up that term. I adopted it from some of the companies that use this term. It's I can tell you what I didn't want to do is use the term things like product-led or product-driven, because people think, you know, in a company, people think that means product management is driving, which of course it's not. And you don't want them to think it's a political thing. So product operating model, or just product model for short, is a term that, I think works pretty well. An operating model, and this is really what's important for our purposes. An operating model is a conceptual model. So very famous, obviously, the Spotify model. That's their term for when you go and look at how Spotify works. You'll see it's a great example of the same principles used at Amazon, the same principles used at Slack, at Stripe, at all these great product companies. They just they have some of their own terms they use for it, of course. And it is also true that the Spotify model, so many people misunderstand what that is. They think it's tribes and guilds and squads. It's not. That's just their Swedish terms for things that all those companies do. What does matter are the principles. And so I'm going to really show you that. So when I say product model, it's a set of principles. Specifically, I'm going to define it as 3 dimensions. We'll start at the highest level, 3 dimensions of the product model, and then we'll get into the competencies, 4 new competencies, and then we'll talk about the 5 product concepts that all these product companies do, and then we'll talk about the 20 principles that underlie those concepts. Now, the truth is, I really need a solid day to go through this at real depth. You can imagine how it doesn't take much to fill up a 400-page book when you're talking about this level of principles. But I do want to give you a high-level view, and I think a lot of it, you'll understand a lot of what we're going to, and hopefully the details will be interesting to you and you'll want to read more later. And of course, I've been writing articles constantly on this stuff, and so you can always find more on the svpg.com website. So operating model, the big thing to keep in mind is it's a conceptual model. And I should say this explicitly, especially because, I think a lot of you are you're in Germany, in Europe in particular. And I mean this with affection. Please don't misunderstand this. But when I go to Europe, the biggest thing I'm trying to change people's minds about is the addiction there to process. It's not about process. In fact, I think process will get you into way more trouble than help for you. What it is about is principles. So product operating model is not a process. And that's also worth pointing out. There is no one good way to do product. There's a lot of good ways to do product. There's also a lot of bad ways to do product, but we all know that. The point is, you can do and follow those principles any number of ways. And so that's why you can go into a company like Apple, which does devices, a lot of devices, which is very different than, say, Spotify, or very different than Netflix or Stripe. And yet you'll find the companies following the same principles. That's what I think it matters. And it's not about the process. We'll talk a little more about process later. It is, I will just be very honest with you. A lot of people I find, especially in Europe, and I don't really understand all the reasons, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know why, but I will tell you that the best product companies are scared to death of process taking over their companies. And that should scare you. Okay, so let's start with the dimensions. I think this is the most useful way to get a big picture of what it means to follow the product model. And it really means 3 different things. The first is looking at how you build. This, of course, is the most fundamental. How do you build, test, deploy your product? Now, let me just be very blunt here. If for your product team, if you're not able to release at least once every 2 weeks, and that's nothing to brag about, right? Continuous delivery is releasing many times a day. But what I really want to point out to you is if you're still releasing monthly, or even unbelievably worse, quarterly, and I'll say this intentionally, every 10 weeks, if you're releasing every 10 weeks, don't fool yourself. You're not agile at all, and you're not doing what you need to do to take care of your customers. Now, I can't believe in the year, 2023 that we still need to say this, but in a lot of the world, especially, in Europe, a bunch of fake agile has taken over. And it used to be that 20 years ago, people moved to agile for this, because it forced them to go to small, frequent, uncoupled, reliable releases. But then unfortunately, some of the process people took over, and they ended up with these huge waterfall processes that are just marketed as agile. And I don't want to spend much time on that, because to me, it's a ridiculous topic. But if you're using a process like SAFe, none of what I'm going to talk about is relevant to you. And frankly, you have no chance to do the kinds of things that I think you need to do today to continuously innovate on behalf of your customers. So I'm going to assume you understand that, and you're serious about taking care of your customers. You're serious about doing what you need to do. This means small, frequent, reliable, uncoupled releases. It means the level of instrumentation that needs to be there so that you know what's going on, the telemetry, the monitoring, the reporting. Otherwise, how do we know? It's all about outcomes, as you'll see, the product model. How would we even know if our various releases are doing what it needs to do? So the most fundamental is looking at how you build. Next is looking at how you solve problems. If you're just given roadmaps of features and projects, then frankly, you're not solving problems at all. Your stakeholders are trying to solve the problems. Unfortunately, they're not equipped with the tools they need to solve problems for technology-based solutions. That's why that doesn't work as far as innovation. So the second big dimension of the product model is moving to product discovery. In other words, how you solve the problems you've been asked to solve. Those can be customer problems, or those can be your company's problems, or sometimes they're both. But this is building the skills in your product teams to be able to come up with solutions worth building. As you'll see, that means solutions that are valuable, usable, feasible, and viable. That's a new set of muscles for most companies that have been just working in the old model. A lot of companies, even companies working in the old models, they've moved to real agile and are doing frequent releases, but they usually don't have any product discovery skills. And so this is adding a major new dimension. And this is really where innovation comes from. It comes from here, from product discovery. Delivery is shipping a reliable solution, but discovery is coming up with what that solution really is. So how you solve problems is the second big dimension. Now, the question sort of comes, well, where do you get these problems? Now, you could still be getting them from the stakeholders. This is a way to work. It's better than probably what you were before, but you can go to the stakeholders and say, what are the biggest problems that you think we need to work on? There's nothing wrong with that. The only question is, are those really the most valuable problems, the most important problems for the company to solve? The third big dimension of the product model addresses that question, which is how you decide which problems to solve. Now, this is product strategy. This is what product strategy is really about. It's looking at holistically at the opportunities in front of your company and making sure you're picking the most impactful opportunities, making sure you're addressing the most serious threats to the business. As probably all of you know, it's very common that companies are just, it's called the peanut butter product strategy. This is when you just spread the resources of the company around, and you're basically chasing hundreds of different problems. And yeah, they're all useful, but because you're chasing hundreds of problems, you're not actually moving the needle on the few that really could change the trajectory of your company. So getting serious about product strategy is the third big dimension of the product model. So at the top level, again, changing how, or looking at how you build, looking at how you solve problems, and looking at how you decide which problems to solve. That's really how we look at the overall product model, those three dimensions. Now we can double click into each of those and understand more. But first, there are a set of competencies that are new. Now, I will tell you the most common reason I see that companies that want to move to the product model fail is because they don't take this section as seriously as they need to. And the reason for that is not a big mystery. It's because they look at their company and they say, oh, we already have product managers. We already have designers. We already have engineers. We're good. They don't. They don't. They have people with those titles, but they're not doing the role that the product model requires of them. In other words, they have not defined those jobs the way the top product companies define those jobs. And this is a difficult one. If it was up to me, we would use different titles. I have always hated the fact that we call, literally, as somebody at Spotify or somebody at Netflix is called a product manager, and then you go look at, pick any big telco or pick any big bank or any big old, insurance company, and they have people called product managers. It's nothing to do. The job is essentially a project management job with a nice title. And just to be very clear here, because I know that a lot of you are based in Europe, the role product owner is ridiculous. And it is way past time that you jettison that. Nobody should be a product owner. It is not a job. It's a role, a minor role, a minor part of a product manager's job. It refers to the responsibilities you have around product delivery, which, as any product manager really knows, that's the minor part of their job. Their major job is what gets built. So no, you don't need product owners. You need serious product managers. So let's talk about that. I know it's goofy to quote yourself, but this is such an important point. But what we're looking for here in the real product manager job is someone that really knows the customers. They really know the data, how people are using our products. They know the different nuances of your business, how your product is sold, how it's marketed, what the compliance rules are, what the privacy rules are, what the legal constraints are. They know those dimensions. They know your market. They know your industry. They know in the enabling technology. And they're on the hook for creating value for your company and value for your customer. That is what a product manager does. To make that explicit, the product manager is responsible for the value and the viability of what the team builds. And they are the ones that are ultimately accountable for the results of the product team. It's not how most people, if you look at a definition of a product owner, that is, it doesn't even make the list. It's just one of those small responsibilities, just like every engineer has to spend time every day in Jira. Now, I don't know any engineers that enjoy doing that. I don't know any product managers that enjoy doing that. But that's not the essence of the job. It's just part of the administration, just like you have to do email. So yeah, there's some stuff we all have to do. That's not the essence of the job. The essence of an engineering job is to build. The essence of a product manager's job is value and viability, business results. Don't confuse that one of the huge issues we have in this industry is, unfortunately, the training that most product owners have is basically just a CSPO or a PSPO class, which has no, first of all, they're almost always taught by people who've never done product at a product company, and they have no idea what the job really is. So all they get is, you get these people that know how to administer a backlog. That is not helpful. I'm saying that because I care about your careers. You do not want to be a product owner. First thing you want to do is become a product manager. That is the job. Yes, it includes the product owner responsibilities, assuming your team is using Scrum or Kanban. It's worth pointing out today, a lot of the best product companies in the world, they just think Agile has just become completely ridiculous, and they have no interest in that. Yet they're doing continuous delivery. Yet they're truly empowered teams. So you tell me, which ones are more agile? The company that thinks Agile is a joke, or the company that's actually living the principles? So I can't tell anymore if somebody is, just because they say Agile, if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It could be either. All I really care about is, do they understand this? If they're a product manager, do they understand what their job is? And do they understand what they need to do to play that role on the team? This is a very hard role. This is nothing to do with the product designer role. Another common confusion, if you think you're in the old model, a product manager, they often overlap with designers, because the product manager really doesn't see what their point is. They don't want to say explicitly they're a project manager, but that's essentially what's going on. All right, so real product manager competency. And I'm going to be very explicit here. Product model depends on product teams. Product teams depend on having a competent product manager. Without these competent product managers, it all falls apart. Product model collapses. All right. Product designers. You all know product designers. Normally this is closer, but I want to be clear here. Product design is not just, look and feel. Product design is how the whole product works. In the product model, the product designer is a true first-class partner with the product manager. The product designer is responsible for the usability of what's built, but more generally, they're responsible for how your users and customers experience the value of the product. That's a very big job. That is not something you add on at the end. The product designer is right there next to the product manager, or at least collaborating every single day to try to figure out a winning solution. All right. And of course, the engineers. And, this is the one that frustrates me the most, because one of the most visible differences between a company following the product model and the rest is literally how they think of their engineers. In so many companies, they view the engineers as a commodity. The worst example of that is when they literally outsource the engineers. I will tell you, that is so counter to the product model. You cannot conceive of anything more counter to the product model than that. The engineers are the ones that come up with most of the innovations in a real product company, because they're working with the enabling technology every single day. So a good engineer, I just want to be clear, a product manager's job is not to write the requirements and give it to the designer, and the designer creates designs, and then they give the mess at sprint planning to engineers to build. That's literally waterfall. That does not create, there's none of the collaboration that we need to come up with an innovative solution. Instead, we need engineers, at least the tech lead, that understands and cares as much about what you build as how you build it. So the tech lead in particular, that's the most senior engineer, is responsible for the feasibility of what gets built, and more generally responsible for delivery. So the product manager and designer are responsible for discovery together with the help of the engineers, and the engineers are responsible for delivery with the help of product managers and designers. All right. Now, there is one other key competency, and this one is incredibly important and not talked enough about. I'm referring here to the leaders of product. And in particular, I mean the managers of product managers, the managers of designers, and the managers of engineers. And they play such a key role in the product model. A lot of people think, well, the product model is built on empowered teams, which means all you have to do is hire good people and get out of their way. And nothing could be further from the truth. The truth is, when you have empowered teams, you don't need less management, you need better management. You probably know Andy Grove, the longtime CEO of Intel, but he's spot on here. What gets in the way of good work? There's really only two possibilities. The first is that your people don't know how to do good work, and that is by far the most common problem. They literally don't know how. Product managers especially, they don't know how. The second is they do know how, but they're not motivated. And that's why in a product model company, the product leaders have two major responsibilities. The first is coaching, which is a nice way of saying teaching the people on the teams how to be excellent at their job, how to be competent at their job. That means, if I hadn't had somebody coach me as a new product manager, I would have failed within months. I'm not exaggerating there. I've shared that elsewhere. I would have failed. I was an engineer, then an engineering manager, and I wanted to learn product. And it was a completely different role. I had very few of the skills I needed. Luckily, I had somebody who committed to coaching me, and within 3 months, he helped me develop the necessary skills to succeed. Without that, it would have gone nowhere. All right. So and these are in priority order, because if you as a manager are not building the skills in your teams, the teams are not going to be able to do what they need to do. All right, then the second is strategy, product strategy, more generally the strategic context. Because if you're going to push decisions down to product teams, it's not enough that they have the skills. You also need to give them the context, the product vision, the product strategy, the team topology. They need to understand how their work contributes to the larger whole. Otherwise, how are they going to make good decisions? So the product leaders play a major role in developing those skills for the teams, enabling the teams. Okay, so those are the 4 competencies: product management. And again, I'm talking about real product management, not product ownership. Second, real product design. Real product design, interaction design, service design, visual design, user research. Real engineering, where the engineers care just as much about what they build as how they build. And then serious product leaders that are responsible for coaching their people and providing that strategic context. All right, now let's talk about the concepts. There are 5 concepts that you find at every product company. And each of those concepts is built on a set of principles. And I'm going to go through those. This is where I really wish I had multiple hours with you to go through, but I want to give you a flavor of where we're going. All right. The first one is product strategy. You've heard me talk about that, but product strategy, I'll be honest, my favorite product activity is product discovery. That's really where innovation comes from. That's what I fell in love with is, if I worked first as an engineer on it, and then I learned product on it, and I just love product discovery. That said, I think I've made bigger impact with the companies where I've led product on product strategy, because product strategy is probably the most impactful work we can possibly do. So let's talk about what that really means. This is just showing the strategic context. And when I say strategic context, that's not just product strategy, but product strategy is our primary living incarnation of this. So we spend a lot of time on product strategy as a product leader. And I want to be clear, product strategy is a product leadership responsibility. This image hopefully makes it intuitively clear why that's the case. I mean, what does it mean? This is another thing where the Agile people went nuts and kind of had no idea what they were doing. But a lot of times you'll find Agile coaches telling every product team they need their own product vision, they need their own product strategy. And I'm like, have you ever worked in a product company before? What kind of nonsense is that? If you've got 20 product teams, which is very common, it's not even that big. If you've got 20 product teams, do you seriously want 20 product visions? Do you seriously want 20 product strategies? Come on, use a little sense. No, the whole point is this is a holistic thing. It applies to all the product teams. There's plenty of strategy work. There's discovery strategy. There's go-to-market strategy the teams do. But product strategy is a holistic concept, just like product vision is. This is not something you do on a team-by-team basis. If you think about that for even 5 seconds, it should make sense to you. All right. So there are a number of principles around product strategy. First is you really need to focus on the few things that can really move the needle. And I will say that's the hardest part for most people. Powered by insights. Insights are really where the magic happens in product strategy. These insights can come from our customers, they can come from our data, they can come from the technology, they can come from the market, they can come from anywhere. But those insights are what really helps us see the levers that we can pull to make a difference. We also need to be very transparent because this is a whole big topic in itself. But fundamentally, when you move to the product model, if your company decides to move, if we talk politics for a second, I don't mean that in a bad way, but politics, we are moving control from stakeholders to, in a large sense, product leadership. Now, you have to be careful that it's not just moving from one power center to another, but the way that works is by being very transparent. You need to be transparent so that the stakeholders understand it's not just your agenda versus their agenda. Okay. And then, of course, one of the art forms in product leadership and product strategy is that just because you've identified a problem to solve that's super important doesn't mean it's going to get solved immediately. You have to realize there's a lot of risks involved, and we're placing a lot of bets. That's what product strategy really is placing a series of bets. So those are the principles that you'll find. I see this in all the good product companies. I should point out, product strategy is the one thing that in other models, the old models, there really is no product strategy at all. The peanut butter product strategy, as it's known, is not a product strategy. It's basically saying, no, we're just going to do whatever the stakeholders need us to do. And that's what a feature team is versus a product team. All right, so let's now talk about the second concept, which is probably the most fundamental concept, which is the concept of a product team. This is so central to how good companies work in the product model. And this is the idea of empowered product teams. Now, that's in contrast to feature teams. It's in contrast to delivery teams. As bad as feature teams are, they're a lot better than delivery teams. If you're using something like SAFe, those are delivery teams. Those are even worse. But in an empowered product team where you've got a product manager, a product designer, a tech lead, additional engineers, you might have additional roles like a data analyst or a data scientist, a user researcher, a product marketing manager. But fundamentally, that's a core team. They're small, they're durable, they don't change every week, every project. They're truly cross-functional, they're empowered, and they're accountable. That's what we're looking for. Now realize product model is all about pushing decisions down to the most appropriate product team. Which one is that? It's the one closest to the relevant customers and the relevant technology. That's what it means, push decisions down, as opposed to the old models, which were basically command and control. The stakeholders make the decisions and then tasks get pushed down. All right, so there's a set of principles around product teams. First of all, they're empowered with problems to solve. This is what it means to be an empowered team. It doesn't mean that they go pick the problems to work on. It means the strategy is what identifies the problems to solve. It means, though, that the team gets to figure out the best way to solve that problem. It means they're accountable for results. It means that they have a strong sense of ownership. Now, this is another one that can be very cultural. So I've had some very good, deep discussions with teams, especially in Europe, because this is a cultural difference. And, you know, it's not a secret. In the Silicon Valley model, stock options are a big part of that. And it's also no secret why they are, because of this. So there's a great Jeff Bezos quote, which is, we want everybody on a product team, especially the product managers, to think like owners, not like employees. And he says, you know, the easiest way to get them to think like an owner is to make them an owner. And that's why you give stock options to teams, so that they are literally owners and they feel that ownership. And I mean, I've been working in this model for 40 years now. It actually doesn't take much to make people feel like a real owner, because they see what happens when things go well. They genuinely benefit. And so now, stock options are not the only way to build that sense of ownership, because I've worked with a lot of teams in other parts of the world where, for tax reasons, for government reasons, stock ownership is not as easy as it is. They made it quite easy in the US because this is so important, but it's not the only way to do it. But let me just say this, the principles of teams feeling real ownership. If you're a leader, a product leader, your job is to make sure your teams feel a genuine sense of ownership. So I'll be very honest here. One of the things we fear the most is teams where the employees don't care. They literally don't care. They don't care what company they work for. They don't care. As long as they get a paycheck every week or every month, then they're fine. That's the worst thing if you're trying to innovate. So we want people to genuinely care. Now, with most people, as soon as you empower them, they care a lot more. They own it. They care very little if they're already handed a roadmap and said, build this. They usually know it's not a good thing to build. It's just they think that that's what they're being paid to do. All right, so that's a difficult one. Probably one of the most important is that how the team solves problems, and it's not a product. In fact, it's common in a good Silicon Valley company that if the engineers are not convinced something is worth building, they don't build it. They don't just build what a product manager tells them to build. The product manager has to convince them that it's worth building. And as you might imagine, some product managers don't like that. They don't like that at all. They think it's too much work. And my answer to them is, this is intentional. Either the engineers are right and this is a dumb thing to build, you're building it for the wrong reason, or they're not right, but you have not shared why they're not right with the team. So they're going to be mercenaries and not missionaries. That speaks to the sense of ownership. So it's critical that you have product design and engineering working together to come up with solutions that are worth building, which leads us to product discovery. And I know I'm going fast. In truth, I'm not going fast enough. The clock is ticking here on me, but these are big concepts. So I just want to give you this high-level overview. Let's talk about product discovery. Again, product discovery, you're given a problem to solve. That's known as the team objective. That's why we use OKRs. And then discovery happens, and then delivery happens. So the essence of discovery is to be able to quickly identify whether a given product idea is worth building. We have lots of ideas. Of course, the ideas we're interested in are the ones that would help us potentially solve the problem we've been asked to solve. But how do you know? Good product discovery is able to try out lots of ideas quickly and decide which ones work. And the reason we need to do that, number one, is to minimize waste. We need to minimize waste. The biggest form of waste, of course, is to build, test, deploy something to your customers that doesn't actually solve their problem, which unfortunately is roughly 80% of what most teams in most models, the old models, do. And that's why there's so much waste. We need to continuously address the product risks, value, usability, feasibility, viability. We have to be humble. We have to realize that nobody is smart enough to know which ideas are going to work and which aren't, which means we have to embrace rapid experimentation. And finally, this is a difference really between small, early stage startups and most companies. But in most companies, we have to be able to test our ideas, but we have to do that responsibly. We have to protect our revenue. We have to protect our reputation. We have to protect our customers, and we have to protect our colleagues. All right. The next big concept is product delivery. And of course, now we're talking about how we build, test, and deploy. I love this Jess Hubble quote. If you don't already know why you need to do continuous deployment, true continuous deployment, please read the book Accelerate. They provide a lot of evidence about something we've known for 20 years, about why the key to both velocity and quality is small, frequent releases. And just to be obvious on this, monthly releases, quarterly releases are the opposite of this. Those are much worse on velocity and way worse on quality. So first principle of delivery is small, frequent, uncoupled releases. You all understand, hopefully, uncoupled. If you've got 25 product teams, we do want each of those 25 to be able to release asynchronously and not in one big stack. Instrumentation for everything. This is often referred to by the engineers as telemetry. But the point is, we've got to know what's happening all the time. Otherwise, how are we going to fix it? How are we going to know if it actually solves the customer's problem? And the flip side of instrumentation is monitoring, reporting, again, at all levels. This happens as low as the AWS level, all the way up to our application level. And of course, we need an infrastructure for deployment that can do things like an A/B test, that can do things like release dark. Because again, we need the infrastructure in place so that we can definitively know that our new solution solves this problem for the customers, for real. And that needs data, and that comes from our infrastructure. All right. There's one more category of concepts, which is kind of overarching all of them, which is really product culture. I love this Henrik Nieberg quote, 100% predictability equals 0% innovation. That is a great example of culture right there, understanding that difference. It doesn't say that predictability is not useful. It says that predictability and innovation are working. There is a relationship there, and you're going to have to choose what you want. Processes like SAFe exist because a lot of CIOs think it's all about predictability. But of course, in a product company, we know it's all about results. So let's talk about the principles. This is what I was alluding to before, is not about process. Principles are more important than your process. Trust is more important than control, command and control. Innovation is more important than predictability. We do need to be able to predict dates. We have ways to do that. They're called high integrity commitments. But overall, we need to make sure that our culture is helping us to innovate. If we're not innovating, the future of the company is in doubt. That's what we're worried about. We constantly have to deliver more value for our customers and our company. And finally, this point about learning over failure. We have to realize now, of course, the reason we do product discovery is to learn fast and cheap. One way to fail is to build, test, and deploy. That is our worst way to fail. All right. One last point here, because I just summarized the product model. We talked about the 3 dimensions. We talked about the 4 competencies. We talked about the 5 concepts. What does it really mean to transform to the product model? In my view, it means moving to those concepts. It's moving to those competencies, moving to those dimensions. It's not, a transformation does not just mean going to Agile. A lot of people thought it did, but of course that only addresses, even if you follow it sincerely. In other words, read the manifesto, the Agile manifesto. Don't follow all the process stuff. Look at the manifesto. It's very useful, but it only addresses the first of those 3 dimensions. It doesn't address the harder ones, the more impactful ones. So transformation really means changing how you build if you need to, changing how you solve problems, introducing product discovery, and changing how you decide which problems to solve, getting serious about product strategy. That's what it really means. There's any number of ways to do that. And don't get me wrong, if you do none of those 3 dimensions today, doing even one of them will be a forward progress. But if here's the thing, I meet with a lot of CEOs. A lot of these CEOs are scared to death right now because there's companies like Stripe that are very good at all 3 of these things. They live these 3 things that are coming after their customers. If a good product company is going to come after you, I would argue you have no choice but to get good at these 3 things fast. The only question is, will you do it fast enough? All right. I want to have time for questions here. It's not really a bigger book, but the new book is Transformed. It will be out in March, and it will talk about really 2 things: the product model, which I've just tried to summarize, and then how there's a lot of techniques we have for helping a company move to that model. It's a pretty big change. It's a change to roles. It's a change to concepts. It's a change to culture. All right. And then finally, I just wanted to make sure everybody has my email in case you don't get your question answered. But I do hope we have time for some questions.
All right. Woo! Well, thanks a lot, Marty. That was really awesome again. Super energetic. Thanks a lot for your talk. I'm sure we have a lot of questions here in the room. Yeah, so I will beam Magnus around again with the microphone. So who has a question for Marty? No questions. Then I'll start with a question. I'm sure there will questions come from. I have an interesting question on Slido. Hey, Marty, what's your opinion on the change that Airbnb is going through? Seems like a step back from what you call continuous delivery.
You know, unfortunately, that's like a 30-minute question. There's more. Let's try to generalize the question a little bit. There are always companies that are experimenting with the product model, always. And I think that's a very good thing. In fact, I participated in a number of these experiments that are always experimenting with things. Airbnb has, first of all, you have to realize they have an advantage that very few companies have, which is they were founded by 3 designers. There's very few companies you can point to. What I think is remarkable is the few that you can point to, they're disproportionately successful. I love companies that are founded by designers because the truth is they can do things that most companies can't. And you have to realize their founders are essentially their product leaders and have been from the beginning. So there's a number of things that they are doing to sort of address, leverage that, maybe is the right way to put it. So you have to understand their context. They have historically struggled with a lot of feature teams. And so I understand where the founders are coming from. I also believe, and you can sort of see it if you've been following the results, they need to make some changes in their business and in their product. So what they're trying to do is totally understandable. I think that some of the things they're doing, they'll end up keeping, and other things they're doing, they're going to end up learning the same thing lots of people learn. And not all those things are good. So, and I want to be clear, though, a lot of people misinterpreted the whole changing releases to only a few times a year. That does not mean that they release only a few times a year. It means that they make things visible. Hopefully everybody in this audience understands the concept of releasing dark. So these are separate things. When you choose to market something versus when you choose to release something. I keep meeting people that don't understand that, and they get very misguided, obviously. So hopefully everybody here does understand that.
All right. Let's see. Now, a question out of this room. We have somebody here.
Yeah, my question was already kind of answered there, so I'll switch to a second one. And that was essentially, it seems that product management is about de-risking what we're releasing. Now that AI is becoming more and more relevant and we can start building code with AI, what does that have effect on discovery process? Does it shorten it or does it expand it? How does AI affect this?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. And by the way, I published, I was asked to do a keynote at an AI conference on this topic. What are the impact of AI to product teams? Which, of course, trying to predict something that's right now very much a moving target is pretty hard. But if you want to see the written narrative of that talk, you can find it on the website. It's like the impact of AI on product teams. But how it's going to impact product discovery, how it impacts product. It's already impacting product delivery more than anything right now. Product delivery, because the tools right now are better for engineers than for any of the other roles. The tools for designers are kind of right behind it. And the tools for product managers are still very nascent. So we have high hopes, but I'll be honest, a lot of my biggest fears about generative AI are around this topic, about how will it impact product discovery, because it could easily make it worse. And I say that because product discovery is very much about, I mean, you framed it as de-risking risk. That's part of it, but more generally, it's about thinking and using judgment. And generative AI has the potential to help with that, or it has the potential to make that worse, because we all know that a lot of people will do anything to avoid thinking. And so it's possible that that discovery will get worse, not better. So I don't know how that's really going to play out. I will tell you one of the most interesting and I think potentially awesome impacts of generative AI is on team topology, which relates to discovery. It also relates to delivery, relates to a lot of things. But my biggest hopes for generative AI are it impacting team topology and ending up with a larger number of smaller teams that have much bigger scope of responsibility. Now that's driven by these tools, especially for the engineers, but that would really help teams feel more empowered and also be able to do more end-to-end solutions. Team topology is a complicated topic for sure. It's one of the most complex ones in the product world. But I would say of all the things that have me hopeful about generative AI, that's the most exciting to me.
All right, I have another question here from Ruud Mestrom, and he asks, what is the difference in product companies between US and Europe? What makes startups in US more likely to grow and succeed, and what can we change from your point of view? I guess it's the European view here.
One of the things I've learned is there's not just one European view. I was just in Stockholm with a lot of the people that had been. It was great. There's a big Spotify influence there, of course. And I've been to Germany for starting in 1996. So going all the time. So there's very different subcultures. Even in Germany, as you know, the Munich subculture is very different than the Berlin subculture, which is very different than the Hamburg subculture. So it's hard to generalize on that. What I will say at a general level, and I think this is if I could pick one thing that is hurting European companies more than anything else, it is the addiction to process. It is literally the addiction to process. Now, that's not unique to Europe. In a lot of the Eastern US, where there's a lot of aerospace and military and government, they also are addicted to process, and they suffer the same problems. But, it's worth looking at. Jeff Bezos still talks, but he's said this for the last 20 years. He likes to call a day one company versus a day two company. A day one company is a company, no matter how big they are, that still acts like a startup. A day two company is where process takes over. And he is constantly fearful of process taking over. And there's a great masterclass on product. If anybody in this listening to this has not watched The Lost Interview with Steve Jobs, it is absolutely will blow your mind. It's literally from 1995, but he could have recorded it if he was alive today. It was so relevant. And he talks about the disease of process people and keeps going. Look at Reed from Netflix wrote a book called No Rules Rules. He is so allergic to process. He wrote their whole culture is based on that, being so allergic to process. So it's something. Nobody's trying to say all process is bad, but process is not the answer. It's especially not the answer to scaling. So that's how I would answer that. And I have worked with some awesome companies in Europe that have understood that. Not to mention Spotify. They literally have a principle, which is that, principles are more important than the process. And that's so critical.
All right. I think we have another question here from within the room.
Yes, great talk and very inspiring, especially the part about process. I wanted to ask this anyways. So you said you should be scared. I can say I'm angry because I see in our 10-year-old company more and more processes coming up. So you mentioned now some references, but maybe from your perspective, what can you do to fight them back?
I know. I'm with you. It makes me so angry. And I'll tell you why. This is the thing. There is an anti-pattern. And I wrote about this years ago because I started seeing it a long time ago. A company is doing so well. They've either been born in the product model or they moved to the product model, and they're doing so well. And they, when you do well, a lot of venture capitalists throw money at you and they want you to take it to the next level. And unfortunately, what happens in too many cases is that company thinks they need to hire a professional CEO or a professional head of sales, and they bring in some MBA from McKinsey or something like that, and they destroy the company. They literally destroy the company because what they're bringing in is these practices that they, they came from a company that's never done any innovation for years. And they think that's why they were hired, to bring their expertise about how to work. And they go from great to terrible. And as crazy as that sounds, and I try to explain to CEOs and board of directors, this is the board's fault. You have to make sure not to bring in people that are going to take you to work like the worst companies. If you want to bring in somebody from a great company to share that practice, terrific. But no, don't make that mistake. The article is called Devolving from Good to Bad, but it's such a common anti-pattern, and it is so frustrating to me. Yeah, especially when you see how much work companies put in to move. Sorry, go ahead.
No problem. Marty, I would never stop you talking. So we have one last question here for you. Let's see.
Hey, Marty. So you talked a lot today about outcomes, being outcome-driven and measuring results. So in a B2B environment, actually we have the problem that sales cycles are a lot longer and learning from results takes a lot longer. And we had an amazing talk about this today. And there the idea was to instead work with leading indicators and a lot more with gut feeling. And actually in my company, we do exactly the same. And I'm wondering what your take is on this.
Oh, yeah. Oh, by the way, I would have loved to have been there in person and to hear the other speakers, because there were a lot of speakers I've never heard talk before. And this is one I would have loved to listen to. And in general, so by the way, I'm going to be honest with you. B2B is easier than B2C. People don't like to say that. The reason it usually fails is because it's all sales driven at most B2B. That's why. But the companies that have moved to the product model that are B2B, it's actually easier, not harder. Now, not everything is easier. You're pointing out one of the common problems is that most indicators are lagging indicators. That's true with consumer things too, but it's even more true with B2B not because they're of the nature of the indicators, but because of the volume of data. We have much smaller data sets, much smaller traffic, for example. So, yes, we use, you were referring to them as leading indicators. We often call them proxy KPIs. So that's not hard. You also used a term that I love. I don't use the term gut feel, but I totally know where the speaker was coming from, because I think people have, so I wasn't there. I would have loved to hear that. But I bet what the speaker was arguing is that gut feel is not as gut feel as you think. Gut feel can be very accurate and predictive. I don't refer to it as gut feel. I refer to it as product sense. This is product sense. When we say somebody has strong product sense, we are saying that they seem to know what's going to happen before it happens. That gut feel, that product sense comes from deeply immersing with our customers, deeply immersing with the data, deeply immersing with the trends in the industry. This is what good product leaders do, is that they immerse and they build that product sense. If you're interested in that topic of gut, I think that is an underrated topic. It's a terrific topic. I wrote an article called Product Sense, and I tried it because too many people think product sense is something you're born with, but it's not. And that's why I don't like to call it gut feel, because some people think that you either have it or you don't. But in my experience, you can develop that gut feel. You can develop that product sense, and you should. And yes, B2B, the key to B2B, if I could just throw this in there, and I know this is counterintuitive to people, the key to B2B is to use consumer techniques, not B2B techniques. Consumer techniques, the bar for consumer products is higher than it is for B2B products, because in a consumer product, every user is the buyer. That's not true in B2B. So it means it's a very high bar, which means we need to make sure we have very strong product skills. The big obstacle to that is so many B2B companies are sales driven. So they need to first, the CEO has to believe they need to move to the product model. But if you can get a CEO at a B2B company to understand they need to move, it's actually easier to do that move than it is for a consumer company.
Product sense. I mean, terrific end, terrific last question. Marty, it was a real pleasure to have you here. Thank you for that talk. Please give him applause.
Thank you for having me.